Well, guys, it's springtime, summertime here in Northwest Missouri. So, what better time to do a deer stand review than way out of deer season? But here we are. I've done one of these reviews so far that you guys can go back and watch on the channel if you want, about the high rise stand, is what I call it, telling about why I love the little skinny hackberry tree in front of it. This stand today, I don't really have a name for it, but it's on my grandpa's old farm and used to be a lot of pasture. It was all pasture. And now in the last 15, 20 years, it's been put back into agriculture. So it's a stand that's in a fence row, heavy timber behind it, as you can see, a lot of thick stuff back in there. So it's good habitat for the deer to travel, hide, have cover. There's oak trees in there they can get some browse from. But it's overlooking a big giant ag field. So this year it's in beans. Some years every other year it's in corn or beans. So you could call it a food plot if you want. It's not really a food plot. It is just an agriculture field, but it definitely makes it an attractive spot for deer. So it's pretty straightforward as to why this is a good spot. There's plenty of food for the deer even after the combine gets in and takes out the beans, takes out the corn. There's still plenty of leftover that gets left behind. Sometimes they'll even eat on that stubble, or find a few kernels of corn off of an ear that's been left in the field. So you can tell why it's such a beneficial place. And in the early season, especially with beans, deer really like to eat the leaves off of beans whenever they're green, in my experience. And there's definitely a lot of food there for them to, and a lot of attraction there for them to get into. That said, this stand also in this area also is quite the travel corridor for deer. So they'll come across the road that's several hundred yards away where there's timber and cover over there. They'll just make their way right across the middle of this field, especially right up north. My grandpa's driveway used to be up there when the house was over there and everything. And there's a little further back across the road over there is a place that we also have permission and hunt over there sometimes. There's a spot or sort of a staging area for the deer where they'll come out of the heavy timber over there and make their way over the course of probably an hour, hour and a half to get all the way over here to this bean field, because it's always at last light, it seems, where my grandpa's driveway is about, I don't know, 600-700 yards away. You can see deer run across the road right there where his driveway was, and then they either make their way across down there, or in this past year there were about a group of 3 does that ran across the road and ran right down here to this stand. From the time that I saw them to the time that I was shooting one was about 2 or 3 minutes. So that's how fast they covered ground to come down here. So sometimes that works out too. That said, because this is in a fence row right up against the timber, the deer like to travel along the edge of it, which is perfect for this stand. Now, you'll see this stand looks like it's right at the edge of the bean field. I think every year that they've put beans or corn into this field, they've gotten about a yard or two closer to the timber. And so this stand, what used to be about 20 yards from the edge of the field, is now only about 5 to 10 yards away from the edge of the field. So that's not great, but you deal with what you've got. So what they do is they like to travel down along the edge of this field, and then you have really great shots at them. That's one thing I like about this stand. Typically you can see them coming from far away. They're not right on top of you whenever you see one. So you can have a chance to get ready, get up, get your bow, rifle, whatever it may be you're hunting with, and be able to get ready to be able to make a shot on one. And I have this camo blinding that I've put up on this stand, because if there's one drawback to this stand, it's the fact that there's really no cover. Now this time of year, because it's spring and summer, we've got a lot of leaves, we've got a lot of greenery on the trees, the grass is kind of tall, that sort of thing. So it looks like there's a lot of cover, but when it gets into deer season and all the leaves fall off, you're kind of stuck out here. I mean, up against the timber, yes, but when they're only 20 yards away, it can be challenging to get your bow drawn on them to make a shot. So sometimes you have to be able to draw that bow well before they get there to be able to make a shot on it, on a deer. So that's the one drawback to this stand, in my opinion, is the fact that you don't have a whole lot of cover to be able to get drawn on the deer and make a shot. A couple of stories from this stand. I've had many times that the deer have come out down south here. That's typically, there's a couple places over down south there where there's trails that come and they hop over the fence there. I mean, same old thing every single time they hop over right there. But they make their way out in that field. And what they used to always do was always make their way up to the north here, and you could almost guarantee that's what they were going to do. Now, in recent years, they've started hopping the fence and staying south and continuing to go east instead of making their way north. So what we did was we put another stand across the field here, so we've got both sides of this field covered. And I've had a chance to shoot several deer over there now too, as they continue to make their way to that stand as opposed to coming up north. I tell one story about a buck that I shot in 2016 in a video about what to do after the shot. So go check that one out. I'll put it in the end screen here, and you can hear that story. It was a pretty cool experience, that one was, as far as pre-rut, getting that deer wound up by grunting at him and snort wheezing at him and getting him to move from a spot that he had been standing in for 15 or 20 minutes and finally getting him to come to me, be able to harvest that deer. Another time over here, one success story and one failure. I had a buck that he was definitely not, he's probably one of the smallest bucks I've shot. He came out, there was a group of about 5 or 6 does and young and half-year-old deer that were out feeding in the field, and then he popped over the fence and he came out, little 8-point buck. He came out and was feeding along with them, and I think this was probably at the end of September or somewhere there in October, and he came down by the stand. He was 20 yards away probably, and I passed on him and let him walk that evening. Then I believe November 2nd rolled around, and this was in 2012, and it was the week before rifle season started. The rut was starting to kind of get going. The pre-rut was definitely on. I hadn't seen a deer the entire evening, and I grunted back into the timber, just blind grunted, just to see what would happen. Because that's the nice thing about this stand too, is that you can't see everything that's out here. So if you have a pretty good idea of when the deer move and thinking maybe they're out there or they're back in the timber where you can't see them, you can do some blind calling and sometimes have some luck on getting deer to come to you. But I blind grunted back into the timber, and whenever I did, I saw a deer move back there. So I grunted a couple more times, and then the next thing I know, after grunting, you just hear ch-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch, and this buck, the one that I had passed on, comes running up to the back of my stand here and stood 10 yards just looking around, looking, trying to find whatever that grunt call was. Well, I just had to sit still because it was too quick, and it's kind of hard to shoot behind me in this stand. And next thing, he went on and ran on up north here, and I thought he was gone for sure. So I grunted a couple more times and never saw him. Then a few minutes later, he pops over the fence up north here, almost the same place that he was with that group of does back in September, October. And he started to make his way down here. And I thought, you know what, this situation was just too cool, the way that I called him in and all that. I've got to take this shot on this buck. That and it being right before rifle season. I know also I had been going through some things in life at that time that I needed something to encourage me. And so I went ahead and wanted to shoot at this deer. So he comes up 20 yards. I get drawn back, make the shot, shoot right over top of his back. But this is why bow hunting is so exciting and great. As soon as I shot and went over his back, he ran about 20 yards up north, and no sooner than he did that, he turned around and walked straight back to the exact same spot, and I was able to get another arrow knocked on the string, make the shot. I hit him a little bit far back. I think it had to be both lungs and a liver because it was a little far back. He ran back in the timber, and we were able to track him and find him that night. I remember being able to track him in the dark when we probably got to be 10 to 15 yards. I could smell the deer. And I told my mom and dad that were tracking with me, I said, you know what, I think I can smell this deer. And sure enough, he was only another 10 or 15 yards away. So that was a cool story. And it could have been a failure because I made the miss, but it was always been a cool story to tell since then because he literally just walked right back to the same spot as fast as he ran away. The failure story was in, I believe it was 2014. I think it was Halloween night. I've always wanted to be able to kill a nasty buck on Halloween. I had 3 mature does come from the south and come up to the stand. And they were alert and tuned in to me, it seemed like, from the get-go. And so I was sitting as still as I could, just watching them, and I was sitting down. I was trying not to make any movement. But for some reason, I just, when you've hunted long enough, sometimes you can just you can feel a presence. You just feel like a deer's around. You just know they are. And I felt like to the north of me there was a deer that was coming down. It wasn't that I could hear anything. I felt like there was. And I think the way the does were acting, I think they kept looking in that direction maybe. But I didn't want to turn my head because those does were so tuned in on me. We're talking about 3 sets of eyes here, 6 eyeballs looking at you. So if 2 of them put their head down to browse, the other one's still watching you. But I was able to slowly finally turn my head, and not only 30 yards away, here came a really nice 10-pointer. He reminded me, I remember distinctly, he reminded me of an old raccoon. He had like gray circles around his eyes. And he was walking down the edge of the field, and I was like, oh man, I was sitting down. I normally try to shoot standing up. This was my lesson in getting stood up and getting ready before the deer are coming to you, as opposed to waiting, because you never know what's going to pop out that you're not ready for. But I was able to get my bow anyway. I think I may have had my bow in my hand already. And when he got to be about 15 yards away, I went ahead and tried to draw my bow. When I drew, they all just kind of scattered. They ran out about 30 yards away. I thought this buck was about 25, 30 yards away, and he stopped broadside. And I shot right over his back. I had misjudged the distance some. And then the next thing was he ran out about 60 yards and just stood there and looked at me. So he won that night for sure. I wasn't able to kill that buck. Pretty sure that I have a trail camera picture of him somewhere that I'll see if I can find to throw up here. But it was definitely a failure. But I'll tell you what, when you've wounded some deer over the years and haven't been able to find them, which I've done a couple times, and it's just a sick, awful feeling. Missing one completely clean, you just got to laugh about it, because I guess if you've been hunting the same deer for years and you don't make the connection at the moment of truth, that can be pretty disheartening. But I think wounding one and not being able to recover it is so much worse than making a clean miss and educating them a little bit. At least you don't have to have that weighing on you. So, but this is the stand over, we call it the Big Bean Field stand. And it's been really fruitful for us over the years. My dad and I both have killed several deer out of this stand, and it's been a really good spot. Thank you for watching Farming for Whitetails. We'll see you next time.